All right, welcome back guys to our beginner series on how to crochet. Last time we covered yarns and hooks, and today we're going to cover creating a foundation chain, which will be the foundation of most any crochet project, and then creating crochet rows on top of that with single crochet. With these two skills, you can create so much, and so let's get started. First, I'm going to review the hooks and the yarn with you, and then we'll get started on our project. So last time we talked about the hooks and looking at the shape of the hook. So let's just quickly review that. I mentioned to look at the curvature of the hook, so you can see how this is a tapered hook, so you can see it kind of tapers up there and creates a little bit of a point, but mostly rounded and rounded inside under the hook. You can also see that hook lies a little outside the rest of the shaft. And when you turn it this way, it kind of bubbles out like that beyond the width of the throat. So sometimes that can be difficult grabbing yarn. It's a bit too smooth. So I'll show you my first crochet hook, and that was super bubbly, and I loved it because it was comfortable to hold, but there's not much room in there to grasp yarn. I think that gap is too big. And this is also a 6.5 hook, so it was definitely harder to grasp this, the number 4 weight yarn. Now let's look at this type of hook. This is also curved up here with a little bit of a point, but you can see this hook is in line with the rest of the shaft, and it has more of a notch up there, so that allows you to kind of grasp that yarn inside of there. And when we turn it, you can see that hook remains in line with that throat and the shaft. So this is an inline hook, and I feel like it offers more control on that yarn, especially when you're starting out and trying to learn how to chain. It's easier to work with. And then you'll also notice the grippers. Definitely get a hook with a gripper. And you'll notice your fingers and hands might cramp up, and this just provides some relief on your hand. You'll also find yarn hooks in other materials such as bamboo or plastic, and those have their place as well, but starting out, these aluminum ones are easier to work with, especially with acrylic yarn, and in general things glide smoother on them. They won't snag on yarn, won't wear down. You don't have to treat them any special way like you would a wooden hook. So definitely start with the aluminum ones you can find at any craft store, and you can find both the inline and tapered ones, either plain like this or with a gripper. And the gripper will have this sizing here on the gripper and on the metal part. So again, you can either go by the US sizing or the millimeters, but I would choose one because it can get confusing when you're thinking of a number 8 hook, which means 5 millimeters, you know what I mean? So go with one or the other. 5 millimeters just makes sense to me. Also, patterns will always have the millimeter hook you need. It may not always have the US sizing on there. And so that's just something you'll have to memorize or keep a chart handy. All right, so now let's talk about the yarns. So we talked about using a 100% acrylic yarn. That's a number 4 medium weight. And this is typical for beginners and the most readily available, inexpensive, easy to work with, glides smoothly. The colors are consistent, the material is consistent. And so this one also tells you which hook is recommended, which is a 5 millimeter. So let's get started with our project. So first we're going to talk about, let's unravel our yarn first, so we don't have a huge ball we have to contend with. And then let's talk about how to hold this hook. So you can either do the knife grip or you can do a pencil grip. I do more so a chopstick grip. It just offers the most relief to my fingers and hands and ligaments in my palm. I don't, and it allows for consistently loose stitches. You can find if you grip too much like this, if you're not doing even strokes, you can get some tighter, some looser stitches. That's with any grip. I just find that this puts too much strain on my wrist and I just get some kind of a compartment pressure. So try different ways and see what works for you. Also, try to grip further apart. That's hard as a beginner, but it will allow you to kind of loosen up your tension because you're going to be tense anyway, and you don't want your hand cramping up too much. You're just practicing. All right. So now, the first step is to create your slip knot. There are many ways to do it. If you can create a knot, just create a knot however you can. One easy way is, here's the end of the yarn, and you fold over, and you fold over again, and you grasp that inside part, hold these tail ends, and pull. And there's a slip knot. I just find it easier to have it in my hands like this, and then I put my fingers in between, grab it, and pull through like that. And then you can stick your crochet hook in there and tighten it onto the hook, not too tight. You still want this to slide. So the width of this shaft is what determines your stitch size. That's where that sizing comes from, because each stitch will be on this hook at some point. All right, now holding the yarn. You want to secure the yarn somehow so it's not just flopping around, and so you can kind of guide it onto your hook as needed. So I just hold it on that index finger of my left hand. I crochet with my right hand, so all instructions will be for crocheting with your right hand. Even if you write with your left hand, you can still crochet with your right hand. It's just about muscle memory, so if you haven't created that muscle memory yet, you can do it right-handed. And then you also want to secure this knot on the hook. So I just use my middle finger and thumb finger of my left hand to do that. And that's just to keep it there as I'm trying to guide yarn here. And then I kind of help guide it towards this loose yarn, you know, whatever you need to do to get your stitches together. When I was a beginner, I was like holding it like this and guiding things, and so do what works for you, and then over time you'll find that it's easier and easier. That's with anything. Even writing with a pencil, remember how difficult that was at one time, and it's just practice. Nothing will be perfect right now. Nothing has to be perfect now or ever. It's just whatever works for you. Okay, so we've created our slip knot, put it onto our hook, and now we're going to chain. Foundation chain is just that. It's the foundation of your project. All your stitches rely on that foundation to go into it. So here's, when you see a pattern and it says yarn over, that's a yarn over. You're basically grasping that yarn with the hook. So this, I mean, how are you supposed to grasp this yarn like that? So what makes it easier is I grab the yarn like this, and then I turn the hook downwards to grasp it that way. And then I use my left hand to guide this tail end this way while pulling my right hand to the right, and we get that chain through. That's a chain one. Let's do that again. Grasp your yarn, turn your hook to hook it, pull it through. Chain 2. Grasp, pull through, chain 3. The sun and clouds are just doing their thing today. Grasp, pull through. And there you can see a chain. And you want to hold it back here just because you want that chain to be loose for your foundation, because if you make it too tight, all your other chains, it'll be difficult to get into the little chain to create those stitches, and then it'll start curling and puckering, and you'll have to redo the whole thing anyway. So to correct for that, you can size up in your hook for your chain. So if your pattern calls for a 5mm hook for the pattern, you can use a 5.5 or 6mm hook for your chain, so you have that loose foundation and you can create stitches into it. You don't want it too loose, so I wouldn't go more than 1mm up. I'm going to go 0.5, so we'll use the 5.5mm hook for our foundation and 5mm hook for the main. If you only have one hook, then just make this chain looser. I just want to show you what that looks like, alternating the hooks. And that's not just for beginners, advanced crocheters do that as well. I never do that when it's a garment, just because I'm afraid of making that too loose, just because my tension has improved over time. And so now I know how to adjust it to create the look I want. But at the beginning, when you know, especially your tense, definitely upsize for that chain. Another way to conceptually help you, because I couldn't even visualize a chain or what was happening as I was trying to chain. So one thing that will help is create your knot and then use your hands to create a chain, just to learn what it is that you're doing. So you're basically grasping yarn through this loop and pulling through, grasping yarn through the loop and pulling through, grasping yarn through the loop and pulling through. And I don't know why, but that just helped me. It's like in a bread recipe, it says mix the dough until it is a shaggy dough, and you just think, what does that mean? And then you put your hands into it and you get it. And so I feel like chaining a little bit with your hands just helps you see it. There's your chain. It's just a chain. That kind of simplifies it mentally for you. Okay, let's chain. Create our slip knot again. And then we're going to use this 5mm to chain out. So again, you don't want to make this too tight. Make sure it slides across the whole thing. And then yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through. And then as you have somewhat of a grasp here, you can guide your fingers up to just hold it closer to the hook. That just allows for more control of that. And you don't have to worry about counts right now. Counting made me miserable and stressed when I started crocheting. And it's honestly not necessary right now, okay? Just learn the techniques first. It's like learning to bake cookies and making them all the same size and perfectly round all in the same day. That's just not practical. Learn one skill at a time, master one thing at a time. So there you can see a chain. So if you do want to count, whatever loop is on your hook does not count. And then you count from there. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, and so on. And then you get to the end, and then that's your last one right next to that knot. And then we're going to talk about the anatomy of the chain loops themselves. So this, in crochet, you're going to see a lot of V's. And in your foundation chain, these V's are what make up the top of your chain and the bottom of your chain. So when you create your first row, you want to go into this top chain. So you'll be holding it like this, and that's just the top. Some patterns you might see, they say go into the back hump. So you have this third loop in the back, and that's the back hump. Right there. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are the back humps. I chained out with chunky yarn for you because it's a little easier to see. This is the Premier Chunky yarn, and it is the softest yarn I have ever worked with. Okay, so I just created a little chain with this so you can see easily the top loop and the bottom loop, top and bottom. So just chains like this, and then in the back you have these back humps. So just compare it to this chain. These are the back humps. And when you turn it, these are the top. These are the top loops, and these are the bottom loops. Another thing I did as a beginner is I created a chain and then I left it to the side so that when I worked on my first row, I had that chain to look at in case I got turned around, because oftentimes while you're creating your first row, this can get twisted, and then I would start working on what's the bottom loop, and so you just want to make sure you stay oriented like that. Whenever you're in a top loop, your next loop that you need to work with will be linked in with that. So if you get turned around and you're all the way here, you think you have to go here, well, that's not looping into here, so you know that's wrong. That'll make more sense as you start working with this. But just so you know what that looks like. So now we're going to change out from our 5.5 millimeter hook to our 5 millimeter and do our first row. So in patterns, and you might not always see this, they'll just say chain out and then put your first single crochet into the second chain from the loop. If your pattern, sometimes they'll say chain out 100, and then when you get to the next line of the pattern and it says first row, it'll say chain 1, and you'll think, I just chained out 100. What do you mean? So that just means that chain at the end of any row helps you climb to that next row. So if you chained out 100 and your pattern needs a foundation of 100, that chain 1 will just help you climb to the next row. And then when you work into the second loop from the hook, it'll be really your first loop. So to understand that better, we're going to mark our loops. So go to your chain, and again, the loop that's on the crochet hook doesn't count. So you mark this. This is the last chain you worked, right? And then the first one you worked is right here, right by that knot. So that's next to last, and that's the last one. So let's mark that. So let's say we've chained out 30 and our pattern says chain out 30 and now chain 1. So at the end of that, we'll chain 1 and then you'll work your single crochet into the second loop from the hook. So again, this is the loop on the hook and 1, 2. And you'll see we're going into the marked chain. So we're going into the very last chain, which is what we want in order to stick with our 30. All right, we're back to start our first row after the chain. So here's our little marker marking that last chain, and this is the hook that had, or the chain that had the hook and does not count as a chain. So from here, so I was talking about how patterns, they'll tell you how much to chain for a pattern. If the pattern is based on, say, an even number of stitches and you've chained out 100, at the end of that 100, it's good to just chain 1, and then that chain 1 is what carries you to the next row. It doesn't count as a stitch or anything. It just helps you climb to the next row without using one of your chains to do so. And then when you work your first single crochet, it's going to be into the second chain from the hook. So here's your hook, and then the second chain is going to be 1 and 2, and that second one is actually our marked one, which is perfect. That means you'll have the right count that you need. So we're just going to put the hook into the top of that chain, yarn over, pull through the work, and now you have 2 loops on your crochet hook. And then you're going to yarn over that and pull through 2 loops. That's a single crochet. Then we're going to go into the next chain. So this is the chain we just worked in. This is the next one. So put your crochet hook in, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. That's your second single crochet. We just worked into this chain, and now if you just tug on here, you can identify all these spaces. These are the chain spaces you're working into. So this is our next one. With the crochet hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and pull through 2. And you keep doing that all the way down. Another thing I forgot to mention is once you do that first crochet, that first single crochet, you can move this marker to mark. So when you come back to this end, you know which is your last stitch. So you can identify the top of these single crochets by their V's. So the top of each stitch is made up of these 2 loops. There you go. So it looks like how the chain looked initially. The tops of your crochet rows will also look like that. Back out for you. All right, so worked into there, and we need to work into this next one. And if you get turned around, sometimes your chain has a tendency to go like this, so you'll be working along these, and then all of a sudden you're on the opposite side, which is actually, this is the back hump, This is the bottom loop, and then you'll get completely twisted. So each time I do this, I tug and I see which is linked to that chain I just worked, and it will always be that top loop. And you can stay oriented that way. And so continue your single crochets all the way down the chain. And now that you have a sufficient amount here, it's nice to have something to hold on to kind of give it some tension to create these single crochets. We go into there, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through two. Next one. And then we're at the last marked one, so make sure you get that one. And now we're at the end of our first row, and to climb, to the next row, we have to chain one like we did at the beginning of the row. And that just helps us climb to the next level, the next row. So you've created a foundation, chain, and a single crochet row on top of that. Your first row, so we work right to left. This is the right side of your work. So when a pattern says the right side, that's the right side. It's where your first row was worked. Most of the time when you crochet in rows like this, at the end of the row, so like we did here, chaining one to climb to our next row, we're going to do that here. You chain one and you climb to that second row to start working it, and then you turn, because we're working right to left, always right to left. Make sure when you turn that your yarn remains on the back of your work so it doesn't get all tangled up. So try to turn the same way each time, and however that works for you. Usually kind of think I make a little clockwise motion and do it that way so nothing gets tangled. So this would be considered the wrong side of the work. However, if you're making something like a blanket and it's a repeat pattern, you know, same thing in the right side and wrong side, then it's reversible and there is no right or wrong side. But when you're making a garment and you have certain textures on one side or baubles or something, you want to remember the right side and the wrong side of the work. The front of the work is whatever is facing you at any time. So we're on the wrong side of the work, but this is the front because I'm working right to left, and this is front for me, and that's the back. And then when I turn it and work on the other side, this is the front. So front, but wrong side. And that's important to remember just because some patterns will say work in front loop only, so that would be front loop, and that would be back loop. So now let's talk about the single crochet, the anatomy of the single crochet. So like we had our chain with the V's, you'll notice the top of the single crochet has these V's. And then here, after our chain one, again, you're going to find the second loop from your crochet hook. That doesn't count. You go 1 and 2 and we work into there. and you go into under both loops. And that's a single crochet and a single crochet. So don't get confused. I'm going to redo that to show you. When someone says the second loop, second space from the loop, always used to confuse me, and I would go here. But that second, it's the first space. So just the first space you can go into, that's where you're working. And you will automatically be under the correct loops. Another thing is make sure you go through both loops. So this is what a single crochet looks like on top. Those V's. So when we're working on this side, this is the front loop and that is the back loop. Front, back, front, back. So you want to make sure you go through both of those loops. If a pattern says FLO, front loop only, you would go through there only. If it says back loop only or BLO, you would go through that only. But otherwise, when they say single crochet, it's through both those loops. So it's that first space or the second chain, same thing. Yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. Next, if you tug here, you can see the spaces that you need to work into right there, those top spaces. If you can't see that, turn it a little and you'll see the V's and work under those. So I'm going to put this crochet hook under, make sure it's under both those V loops, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. Next space, make sure it's under both loops, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. Next space, and just keep doing that, keep doing it over and over again until you can just do it without looking at your work and just watching TV. That'll be years from now. Just do it until you're happy with your technique. So every day or even every weekend, especially every weekend, at least once or twice a week, just create a swatch. Do 16 single crochets or chain out 16, then do your single row of single crochets above that and make about 16 to 20 rows. And in doing that, you're also practicing creating a gauge, which we'll talk about later, but just a swatch. It helps you create a swatch of your work. And so by practicing that, you can practice even tension, even rows, even sides. So just do that. So I just went into that last marked row. You would chain 1, turn, and then just continue on. So if you continue that on, you would get a little swatch that looked like this. So this yarn itself just curls, but that's what you should practice. And a gauge is really counting how many stitches and rows you have within a 4 by 4 inch swatch. So in these 4 inches, and you measure in the middle of your swatch because that's where all your attention would be more equal there rather than at the very beginning. So if I were to count that from that line, I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe 12 single crochets across. And then you would measure how many rows you have up and down. My swatch is not big enough. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rows. So that's just how you do a gauge swatch and how to measure it. Okay, so I want to show you, so we worked in both loops, front and back, as is standard, unless otherwise specified in a pattern. So I wanted to show you what it looks like if you just do one loop. So in this swatch, I did back loop only. So I created the chain, then I did the single crochet, and then I worked in the front loop only. And so you can see these loops sticking out are the back loops. Since I stitched into the front loop and pulled that up, it left the back loop behind and creates a nice little pattern and texture. So if that's what you're going for, that's what you would do. An example of back loop only would be this. Look at this nice ridging. So that I took up the back loop. So when you take up the back loop, you're pushing forward everything in front of it, which is how you get this thickness. And this is exactly how you would do the ribbing on a sweater or a cuff. You would work back loop only and you get this nice ribbed and stretchy material. So you can just play around with those stitches as well. And just practice, practice, practice really will give you that muscle memory. And initially you have to do it over and over again. It seems like you might have to watch this tutorial video over and over again, but over time you will have that just embedded in you like anything you do on a regular basis. It's like if you didn't write for a long time, you would still remember how to do it. And I started crocheting over 18 years ago, and I took a break for, grad school, post-grad training, but then I was able to hop back into it and do it again. So now you will be ready for the next lesson in this series, which will be half double crochet and double crochet. After I teach you all those stitches, these 3 foundation stitches are the main stitches used in most, if not at least every crochet pattern will have one of those stitches, if not heavily rely on all of them, unless it's some, funky pattern. But you can make thousands of beautiful things once you have these stitches down. Have the chain down, single crochet, double crochet, half double crochet. And then we'll start creating patterns using those. And you can start even creating patterns yourself. So you will get there. Don't stress about it. Enjoy the process. And I'll see you in the next video.